that airline pilots are lazy. That's something that, yeah, sure, I'd say, in my tongue-in-cheek making fun of you guys. In reality, I don't think that's necessarily true, but there are elements of it that airline pilots are not. It's harder for them to transition because there is so much more work, and it's not because that they're lazy, but they're unprepared for it, or they flat out just don't know that it has to get done, and so things then get left behind. And then especially, getting into a little bit more trouble here, the older that these people get and you get to post 65, you're trying to teach an old dog new tricks sometimes. And when you're talking about extremely wealthy people who want things done a certain way at a certain time, and then trying to teach somebody multiple new things, especially like, hey, I mean, as simple as is the flight plan filed? There's just a lot of things that happen relatively quickly, and airline pilots, the longer that they stay there, the harder it is for them to transition, just because of the sheer amount of stuff that needs to get done that used to be, quite frankly, spoon-fed to them.
Yeah.
And not that there's anything wrong with that, because that's the way the airlines work, and everybody has their segregated, this is your department, this is your lane, stay in it. Mm-hmm. And it works generally fairly well. But all of a sudden those lanes get really blurry, and it's kind of just this wide open. It's kind of like driving on a freeway in the United States versus going down to Mexico, where people just make their own lanes.
It's a suggestion, the lane.
It's a suggestion. We all want to get there without crashing into each other, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And so I think that it's not laziness. It's just trying to teach somebody a completely different way of operating airplanes. Yeah. And it is very different.
Yeah. And I think, and that's really what I was hoping to hear from you, is that, there's these rumors that you hear, especially when you're starting out in the aviation industry and you're building your time and getting your ratings, and you hear, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? What kind of job are you trying to get? And a lot of people say, well, I want to fly corporate, or I want to fly airlines, or I want to fly cargo, or they specifically name a particular airline that they want to fly for. I can remember some very young flight instructor told me that he wanted to be a Southwest Airlines pilot as soon as possible, and did everything in his power to try to leverage his career path to get there. And this happens, we have these preconceived ideas, but we've also heard this, even when we were first starting out, hey, if you go corporate, they're going to work you hard, you're going to work hard, and you're going to be 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And that's really the gist of the knowledge that I had. Here you are now, being in the corporate field for over a decade, and I'm learning so much just listening to your story of your journey. And it kind of, I like how you dispel the fact that this rumor that, they don't hire airline pilots. Well, yeah, they have a lot of respect for, especially pilots that have the experience,
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just that you don't want to end up with a person with expectations that aren't met. And the later that airline pilots get in life, the more their expectations. And I think that you guys have even seen that with, you guys are flying, with where you're at right now, the guys that you're flying with have been with an airline now for not years, for decades.
Decades, yeah.
And pulling somebody out of that mentality is kind of hard. It's kind of hard. And, you were talking about that guy, that flight instructor that, when we're all young, we have these things that we think we want to do. And then, things happen and you are exposed to more stuff. Quite frankly, when you're first starting out, you think you know what you want, but you really don't. And there's nothing wrong with that. And things will just change. But the longer that you are in one or the other, the more you get comfortable with that, and the more your expectations are, this is the way that it is, or this is the way that it should be. And then when you make a big change, like going from airlines to corporate, or just to a lesser degree, but still to some, from corporate to airlines, it is a different experience with a different set of expectations. And I do think generally is a little bit harder going from the airlines to corporate, but I would not say that it has anything to do with laziness.
Yeah. Yeah, you know whose opinion I'd like to hear on this is Rob. So
What
yeah,
offer?
and we were talking to Captain Roger about this preconceived notion, especially when you're starting out in the industry, corporate versus airline. What's the better route to take?
Hmm.
If you go airline, can you go back to corporate? If you go corporate, how hard is it to get into airline?
Yeah.
And we've all heard these rumors. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think what Roger said was very true, spot on. Honestly, I sit here and I look back at my, what's it now, 17-year career in the industry, and um, I lost a lot of like the regular GA knowledge of aviation, and and obviously a lot of the rules have changed, especially with rest rules and stuff like that, and I think back, and there's parts of GA that I miss and parts that I don't. And then listening to Roger, I remember there was a trip. I was jump seating from Phoenix to Dallas, and this was a few years ago. I was still with Sandpiper, and the air crew. Well, look at you, Tony.
Your head's like
going. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm
We're just
You're like
laughing at
a
you.
floating head almost.
You're like-
Yeah,
Just
that's crazy. I'm getting it's on the table, and it's just not at the right angle, and there's no
Just
like
get comfortable, man.
ice chest to put it on. So yeah, I'm just trying to find it. So anyway, I was jump seating on an Airbus back to Dallas, and the crew, I guess at this time, Legacy had just gotten the Airbus on property, and the Legacy airline pilots side of the house, it was brand new airframe to them, because they had it at America West, they had it at US Air, but Legacy was brand new to them. So these pilots had been flying like the 777 and the 7 whatever overseas for the last like 10 years or something like that. So this is like they really didn't fly the domestic side of the house.
Yeah.
That often. So to get to where Roger was talking about, they had to divert into a small airport in North Texas called Wichita Falls on a Sunday in the evening time. Airport is closed, no tower. These guys were as lost as can be. And I felt so thankful I was actually in the cockpit, because I'm like, hey, dude, you got to switch to that frequency over there called the CTAF and tell them what you're doing, because there may be other airplanes landing here, and they're like, oh, okay, good call, and then they landed, and then the FO was like, man, I have no clue how to get a clearance out of here. Towers closed. I can't get a hold of ATC, air traffic control on the ground here. The frequency's not working. I was like, yeah, you might need to call. You might need to pick up the phone,
the radio,
and call 1-800-WX-BRIEF, or call the nearest flight service station to get the clearance out of here. And he's like, yeah, I haven't done this in 20 years since actually he was in the military, so he's never even done it with them.
Yeah.
So it was like, and it just dawned on me exactly what Roger was talking about. I think they know how to do it, but they just haven't done it in such a long time that the processes in their brains just don't start working until, they've done it once or twice again. And, that could be a challenge, especially in a high pace, high demand environment that like Roger works in, where, you really, time is money to them, and, you have really high expectations from your customers and your owners. So, I think, obviously the experience flying the airplane and handling the airplane, that's, I think most people would, get all tens on that side of the house. It's the actual, administrative part of being a pilot, and following their SOPs and processes that they need to have, that we're just, like he said, we have departments that handle so many different, aspects of our job that we don't even think about it anymore. We just wait for a message to show up, in our messaging system to tell us that, hey, you need to go to training, or, hey, you need to get your new medical again. So
yeah, I think
it's
cost-wise,
different. It's a different world.
Yeah, when you're dealing in a corporate structure, you're dealing with, smaller aircraft, obviously, a very small operation in comparison to even a small regional or charter. So, it doesn't make sense to have one person only that does only flight plans and fueling and maintenance, and then have only one person doing scheduling, and only have one person doing another aspect. It just makes sense to have the pilots handle all of it, because when you have 4 airplanes on property, why are you going to go and hire all these other people? That's not cost effective. But when you get into an airline business where you're on a schedule with minimal turn times, where you land, maybe there's a crew swap, maybe not, and within 35 minutes you're back in the air, fully loaded, fully fueled, or however much fuel you need. All that's been calculated for you. The weather has been calculated for you. The routing, everything. Catering's been calculated. All that stuff. Meanwhile, Roger's doing it all himself. Yeah. So it makes sense when you have a multi-billion, if not trillion-dollar operation worldwide, to have you focus on your job. And us as pilots, what is it? We have to be in our seat, ready to go 20 minutes prior to departure. Completely, like checklist done, everything ready to go. And sometimes we don't get there until 40 minutes prior to departure. So we have 20 minutes to do our pre-flight checks, our walk-arounds, our make sure we send the fuel, make sure we, verify all the hazmat material that may or may not be there, the loads, sign the release, check the weather, check the routing, brief the flight attendants, brief any special passengers that might need a briefing. There's so many procedures that we just focus on just our part. And when it all comes together, it's actually quite beautiful. It's kind of like a zipper. Everybody does their part to bring it all together.
It is.
But how many millions of dollars in payroll does that take? So
totally. I know the logistical part of it's amazing. And when one thing stops, it creates a little ripple effect in the whole operation. And I go back to my military days, and I think about in the military world, logistics is a huge, huge deal. If the men and women fighting the war on the front lines, they can't do it forever. They need supplies, they need gas, they need ammo, they need intel, they need information, they need equipment, and that stuff, and they need food and all that stuff too. And all that stuff is brought up to the front line through a network. And if you want to cripple an army or a military, you take out the logistical part of their operation and you bring them to their knees, and that's how you slowly break them down and you defeat them. Well, it's the same thing with an airline. The logistics part of it is a big deal. When we have these bad weather days, that's basically what breaks down. Is you get the airplane and the people there, but then once they're there, they can't move anymore. So you end up not having crews in place. You can't get your gas because the lightning is in the area. You can't unload the bags. Passengers are not connecting, and it's just turns into a big mess. And it's truly amazing how an operation as large as Legacies and all the other ones, how they can keep those things running as well as they do and recover after something like that, or even just on a normal day, how everything just runs, hums along. Yeah, it's true. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, and that's what I think the news doesn't get right, is they go, oh, it's a pilot shortage. That's why there's these delays and cancellations, pilot shortage.
True.
And though that's a true statement, like you said, the multitude of departments that are caught up with the logistics of flying a multi-million-dollar airline, that's really, they have a huge role to play in all of this too, with these cancellations and delays. Totally. It's staffing, from dispatchers to fuelers to caterers. I mean, it all plays a very significant role.
Totally.
And Rob made one good point that I do want to kind of emphasize, because I danced around it, but he brought up the point. It's never about the flying. And when you go from, airline pilot to a corporate pilot, it's never about the flying. If I was going to take an airline pilot, put him into the airplane, 100%, I'd be sure that we could transfer him over. Any kind of emergency that happened in the real world, that they'd be able to handle it. I talked about the procedural stuff from crossing over oceans. It's never, ever the flying. It's everything outside of the flying. Because when those other things don't happen, then like what you were just saying, it all just falls apart. And if the one person that holds it all together, which is the pilot in a corporate, the whole thing will unravel. And the other part of it is that, unfortunately, where I can take a guy that flies really well, the owners, they don't notice, they don't care. How often you're going to have an in-flight emergency and the owner is going to go, "Oh man, thank goodness we had you on board." That doesn't really happen. But what they do see is when everything falls apart, or when there's no ice on the airplane, or when there wasn't catering, or that's a thing that happens every single flight, no matter how quick the turn. And that's the thing where that transition has a harder time taking place. But that's what everybody sees every single day.
Yep. And it's funny because, and I hate to admit it, I shouldn't say I'm admitting it, but it's from my observation, it's very obvious that is how pilots think, especially airline pilots, especially military pilots. I should say especially military pilots. I take that back. But mostly most airline pilots, that's the way they think is, they could do any aviation job because I could fly the crap out of an airplane.
Yep.
I'm like, that has nothing to do with the job. Yes, that you have to be able to fly an airplane, don't get me wrong, but you have to be able to do everything else very well. And that's what makes a good pilot, is being able to incorporate everything that you have to do outside the cockpit, before the flight, during the flight, and after the flight. And that's what makes a good crewman and everything else. And that was funny because it kind of goes along the same lines as what you were talking about there. When something doesn't happen, that's when the owners notice it. Well, that's how it is at my house. When the internet drops off, it doesn't matter. The toilet could be leaking. The walls falling, the doors falling off the hinge. As soon as the internet goes off in my house, my kids are like, "Oh my God, what the hell's going? This thing sucks!" So.
Yeah, that's why I want to buy a cabin in the woods and periodically go up there for like a week with no internet, no cell, no nothing. Nothing. Yeah. Unplug.